Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for sitting down and meeting with us tonight. I'm so delighted to be able to give this jam-packed information session. We're going to be talking about slashing your power bills, a little bit about renewable energy, how to turn your garden into the biggest room of your home, and how to grow beautiful veggies at home, how to be able to get some delicious organic veggies, which ain't the easiest thing to do when you live in this part of the world. So lots there, a couple of housekeeping things. We can't see you, you're on mute, so we're not going to be recording this and getting your faces and all of that around the world. We will have the Q&A session in the last 15 minutes. So there's the Q&A button on your screen. Type them at any time, but we will be answering them in the last 15 minutes. And if we do lose you, if you sort of fall into an existential void, we will definitely try and get you back. So hang in there. And I hope that this is going to be a great experience for you. It's quite strange for me staring at a camera, but I just imagine you all sitting there ready to learn lots of information. Okay, so firstly, we wouldn't be doing these events without the support of the City of Bayswater, extraordinary council, and very passionate in this space. So it's wonderful to be partnering with them. Okay, so top tips for slashing your power bills. I was just saying off air to my friends that it just blows me away that we've lost 5 prime ministers over utter anger at the thought of our power bills going up and up and up. So it's kind of strange to me that we haven't put massive resources to making sure every single person knows how they can reduce their power bills, because none of us like paying utility bills. But I think when you start to see what we're showing you here, there's lots of ways that we can reduce our power consumption. Okay, so let's start with that. And the most important tip that I can give you is to find out how many units of power you're using a day to start with. It's really easy to find out. It's on your Synergy bill. You can go online and have a look, just put in your account number, or it will be on your bill. Now, this little graphic that I've got for you here is saying that, you know, there's kind of an average is about 15 to 18 units a day. And if you can get it down to 11 or 12 or even below 10, you're starting to do really well. When you're up towards that other end, 50 or 60, my sister once upon a time used to use about 60 units a day of power, but they were growing some interesting things in a shed. But you can see people use huge amounts of power if they have large amounts of air conditioners. They're trying to keep a big energy guzzling house cool or warm. But the important thing I really want to get out there is just because we're urging you to use less power doesn't mean you're ending up living in a grass hut or having permanent earth hour. There are lots of things that you can do to reduce your power consumption that in no way compromise your life. In fact, they're probably going to make it a more comfortable and enjoyable space to live. All right, so tip number 2 is to know your enemy. And I've got to be honest, I think if we will look back in 20 or 30 years, we will look at the McMansions, the trophy houses that we've been urged to build and go, what were we thinking? I'm really thrilled with the small house movement that is really the counterculture to this idea that's been peddled, let's face it, by builders and the Building Association. They want people to have great big houses because more people are employed, more resources are used, and you spend more money. But it's actually interesting to know that we've been told that you have to have a big house because it has a higher resale value, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, well over 60% of the housing needs in Australia are for single people or a couple. In other words, we don't all need these big houses with 4 bathrooms and 6 home theatre systems, etc. And the other thing is they can't help but consume power. The black roof, huge amounts of paved area, and virtually no garden. This is a recipe for huge power bills because it has no interaction with the environment. It has really replaced or trumped, excuse to use that word, but it has basically supplanted the garden. And in the old days, the garden was the thing that did everything to help cool your house or make it a little bit warmer in the wintertime. Okay, so we're going to explore that. So number 2 is understand that your house is really at the mercy of the elements. And step number 3 is to kind of have a bit of an idea on where you use power. Now, this is a typical pie chart for power consumption for the average home in Australia. And you can see water heating right up there. Water heating is a huge energy expenditure for most houses, about a third, particularly if you've got one of those old electric clunkers. I'm pretty pleased to say not many people have them anymore. So I'm just going to run through a few tips for each one of these, because if you can start to reduce energy consumption for each one of these, you're going to be able to get to a point where you are really bringing down your power bills. Okay, so water heating, number one, if you do have an electric hot water system, they use massive amounts of power. It is far more cost effective to go towards a solar gas boosted system if you can, even though it might cost a bit more to start with. When you throw in the running costs for an electric hot water systems, within 2 years, you're going to find a gas boosted solar is going to pay for itself, or a heat pump. Other things that you can do if you're not changing your system is just regulate the thermostat on the hot water system over the course of the year. So for instance, in the summertime, you can adjust your temperature down. You don't need to be boiling water at 60 degrees. Personally, I have my thermostat set to 42 degrees in summer, and I crank it up to 50 in the wintertime. But you're saving a lot of money if you are just reducing the actual temperature of the water that you're heating up. Number two is look at the lagging. So have a look at the pipe that's going from your hot water system, and it is copper by and large, great conductor of heat, which means it can lose huge amounts of that heated water as it's going from the actual hot water system itself along cold pipes on the outside. So pipe lagging is a great thing to add. You can buy commercial pipe lagging from pretty much any hardware store. It's pretty cheap, and it's foam that wraps around that piping, and that can make a big difference. Then when we have a look at something like heating and cooling, very, very important. Number one thing is if you have air conditioning, and let's face it, most people have air conditioning. The number one thing to keep in mind is that there's the sweet spot for the air conditioner. Try and run it between 22 and 24 degrees. 22 in winter, 24 in summer. And for every degree you go above or below that, you use 10% more power. So if you go into a shop in summer and it's freezing at 18 degrees, well, that means it's using 60% more power than if they had it at 24 degrees. So that's number one. And I remember hearing from an air conditioning expert that if you do have your air conditioner, cranked below or above that, it burns the motor out so much quicker, because they're not actually designed to be having the needle pushed to the red, as it were. So keep the air conditioning unit at 22 to 24. That's going to make a big difference. I'm just going to go back to show you some of those other things on the pie chart. So the heating and the cooling, as we said, very, very important. I'll touch on that a little bit more when we talk about some of the retrofitting of the home. But refrigeration, it's really important. If you're designing a new house, or if you can retrofit, please don't have your refrigerator, which is designed to keep things cool, right next to the oven that's designed to heat things up. So have a separation between those two. Make sure there's a separation at the back wall too for your refrigerator. It needs to have cool air coming in, and if it's jammed right up against the back, then it's got hot air and it's blowing in hot air, which means it uses more power. Check the seals on your refrigerator, and again, make those seasonal adjustments. In the wintertime, you can turn your fridge and your freezer down. Again, for every degree you go above or below that, you use 5% more power. So that's really, really important stuff to do in relation to that. The other thing is lighting. I'm so thrilled with the changes that have occurred in lighting. In the good old days, we used to talk about going from incandescents. That's the old light bulbs that used to melt your hand if you touched them. Then we went to CFLs, compact fluorescent lights. They're okay, but there's the mercury issue with those ones when they break. So we would say leapfrog and go to LEDs. And LED technology, I've got an LED light now staring me in the face, so energy efficient, and they last so much longer as well. So that can make a big difference. The other one is 10% of your power is standby power. 10%. So just by going and making sure you turn everything off at the end of the day. When you see that red thing glowing back at you, that's like a car idling at the lights. It's still using power, even though you're not actually actively using it. So I personally, in my home, I use the little foot controllers. So I have all of my, say, the TV and video plugged into a power board, and it's just got a little foot tapper so I can turn it off really easily. Get into the habit of turning off that power when you're not using things, and you'll save another 10% of your power. Okay, so I'll quickly run through that air conditioner again. As we said, very, very important to be able to make those changes. And then these are some of the retrofit ideas. These come from Maddie Walworth from Ecotecture. Some of the things that we can do to make a difference when you're retrofitting your home. Obviously, once you get your power down below about 15 units a day, that's when you can start to think about buying a solar PV. PV stands for photovoltaic. This is the PV going onto my place. And I got a small system, only 1.5 kilowatts. But I didn't need a big system because I consistently had my power around 9 to 11 units. A 1 kilowatt system will produce about 6 to 8 units of power a day. So if you're using 10 units a day, a 1 to 1.5 kilowatt system is going to do pretty much all of your power consumption for you. So you can make a massive difference that way. But let's look at some of the ways we can make a difference to the house itself. Because again, your house is just a glorified box. We fill it full of trinkets. We might have all these different aesthetic codes on it, but in terms of its ability to keep us cool or warm, it's really at the mercy of the elements outside if it's not well designed. So if it's 35 or 45 degrees outside, it wants to be that temperature inside. Conversely, if it's -2 outside, it wants to be the same temperature inside and suck your heat out. So if your house is not well insulated, and I'll talk about that in more detail, that's when you consume massive amounts of power. That's why the heating and the cooling is such a big part of your energy budget normally. Okay, windows. Windows are the weak link in the chain. There's no doubt about it. I often say in workshops, touch a window in the middle of winter, freezing cold. Touch it in summer and it's going to be hot. They have very little ability to moderate the transference of heat in or out. And we forget that just because they physically stop the wind and the rain, we assume it's having the same effect on energy, which it doesn't. So windows are the weak link in the chain. And have a look at this. I love showing this photo. This is a thermal image taken of a house with the windows open in winter. When I say open, it means the curtains are open, they're looking out, but it's a really cold night. They've got the air conditioner on, warming the place up, but the windows are open and it's just hemorrhaging that heat out. You can't see it, so we tend to not value it, but it's a hugely important part of that process. Okay, so how do we get a handle on where our windows are under attack? We start to get some orientation. Find out where north is. It's on your phone. If you don't know how to use the phone, I guarantee your kids know. They've already hacked into your phone and done all sorts of crazy things to it. But on the phone typically is a compass. Find out where north is. Once you know where north is, then you know where east is, you know where west is, and you can see the impacts of the sun over the course of the year. Very, very important. And you can see on this diagram here that the winter sun rises in the northeast, sets in the northwest, and it gets in Perth to an angle of about 35 degrees. In summertime, it's rising in the southeast and setting in the southwest. It's a completely different beast, gets to 82 degrees. So once you understand that, you can make a bit of a difference. And this is one of Matt's fantastic diagrams. You can see here the angle of that sun over the summer and the winter. So you can design your house, you can retrofit it to exploit this. Big windows to the north allow you to flood that house with winter warmth. And if you have appropriate shading, I'll show you some diagrams soon, you can make sure that you don't have it being at the mercy of the summer sun. There's nothing worse than big north-facing windows, which are great in winter, but they make the house a hot box in the middle of summer because you just haven't been able to protect that place. And remember, to the east and the west, that's the low sun. It's rising and it's setting, which means even if you have beautiful, generous eaves, you're still going to get that sun coming in. So that's where you can look at external shading. I'll show you some images soon, or you can look at some careful planting, and I'll have some species lists coming up soon. They're all going to make a big difference to help you get on top of this. Again, it's about understanding where you live. And I passionately advocate, again, walking around with a compass, mark where the different angles are. So you can go, right, I'm looking at a window, it's going to be under attack from the summer sun. It's going to be attacked by the setting afternoon sun. And once you know where you are going to be at risk or where those impacts are coming from, you can start to make adjustments. And I absolutely promise you, if you have one of those windows in your house, you know, the place in the summertime where you go, oh my God, don't go in that room in summer. It is like the Bikram yoga room. It's 50 degrees. I guarantee that if you put some external shading, you will transform that room. You will shut down the heating instantly. And that's when you start to make a massive difference. Okay, so the other thing I passionately advocate or really want you to get from this is it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to retrofit your home. You can spend a lot of money. Of course you can, but you don't have to. There are lots of simple tips. And this is tip number 1. So this was my house. Again, I walked around. This was a southeast facing window. So I knew the morning sun, stinking hot day was going to smash that 2 square meter window. And the only protection was this Venetian blind on the inside. Okay, so what did I do? Simple solution. Stinky old dog blankets and 5 plastic pegs. Now, if you can't afford that, then you really are not interested in saving power. But the difference that made, it didn't look great. I'm not denying that, but it instantly shut down that heating effect. That room was so much cooler. It meant we didn't need to do the artificial cooling, and therefore our power bills came down. When we could afford it, we transferred to this. And I've said it's groovy and adjustable because this particular one, it has a little ratchet down the bottom. So I could adjust it and lift it up when it was a mild day. When it's a stinking hot day, I could pull it right down and protect the house. Very, very important stuff. And that is a big part of this process, is that we need to make, sorry, that sneeze was coming for a long time. We need to make the seasonal adjustments. And I often say that autumn and spring are the times when we get these fluctuations between cold days and then hot days again. You need to be able to give yourself the ability to shut it down, as in that heat when it's a hot day, and be able to open the house when you want to have it to come in. And I used to say as a quiz question, why would a 30-degree day in March seem to make your house hotter than a 40-degree day in December? And the answer is, of course, that the sun is starting to get lower in the sky by March. Remember, I said December the 21st is the longest day of the year. That's when the sun is at its highest. June the 21st is when it's at its lowest. So by March, you're halfway from the really high down to the low. So that means the sun has got much greater access to your house. So even though it's not as hot, it's more effective in getting into your house. So that's why you need to make those seasonal adjustments. And if we have a look at the south of the house, conversely, this is the place that's never going to get the sun. The sun is always in the north of the sky. In the summertime, you'll get a little bit of morning sun and a little bit of afternoon sun. But in the wintertime, this is where you'll lose large amounts of heat. So it's really good to have good curtains on the inside of your house for winter, particularly on that south area, because that heat just wants to go out. You've got that temperature gradient between the inside that's warm and the south side that's very cold. So there's a strong urge to pull that warm air out. So good protection on that side is really important. These are some designs by Matty Warwork from Ecotecture. You can see what he's done here. So beautiful deciduous trees to the north. Deciduous trees, these are trees that lose their leaves once we start to get the cool conditions. As a tip for deciduous plants in WA, make sure you go for low chill varieties. Low chill means that these are plants that don't need as much really cold temperature to trigger leaf loss. We call them chilling hours. So it's 7.2 degrees, that's a chilling hour. Low chill is about 200 to 300 hours per year. High chill, which is areas like Boddington, Wandering, Fridgetown, otherwise known as Bridgetown, they get up to 1,000 hours of chill. So that's why when you go down to Bridgetown, you'll see cherries, you'll see a lot more deciduous trees than you do in Bayswater and other parts of Perth, because Perth is actually not that cold. Even though you might grumble about it being cold, on an international scale, it's not very cold. So that means we have a very limited number of deciduous trees that do well. So go to good nurseries like L&B Tree Farm or Dawson's and ask for low chill varieties, which means they're going to lose their leaves effectively, so you get that winter sun. So he's got a beautiful outdoor area, and again, oversized eaves, very, very important. It amazes me that I see houses built in Perth with no eaves. It's like, do you want to spend a lot of money on air conditioning? You have to have eaves, and I would say even beyond that, particularly to the north, some sort of shading. His second tip is insulation. Insulation is so important. As I said, your home is just a glorified box. And if it's not well insulated, then it's going to hemorrhage heat in the wintertime and it's going to be flooded with heat in the summertime. But there's lots of different ways we can insulate. So here's some retrofitting ideas. So you might have a dark brick wall, east or west facing, which is just getting pounded by that summer sun, and you can touch it, you can feel it, and it's warm. And the trouble is, if those surfaces are getting a lot of sun, what it means is that store of energy is then transferred into the house in the summer, and that's why houses take a long time to cool down, which means you've either got griping kids because the house is stifling, or you just crank up the air conditioner and use a lot of power. Okay, so you can retrofit. So Matt's got a design here where you can see he's just put some air cell, which is a fantastic material that is a silver foil with bubbles inside. So it's really high performance insulation. He's put some battens, and then he's put a light cladding on the outside. The lighter the cladding on these east and west walls, it means it's not going to absorb a huge amount of heat, and therefore it's going to dissipate quickly, and you've got that insulation protecting that area. On west and east facing walls, I've put Rio wire and grown creepers. I put shade sails. I put stinky dog blankets. All of those things can make a big difference to retrofit and to insulate. This is something you can do when you might have a gyprock wall. So it's not brick, it's just got an outside and then gyprock and nothing in between. So it's got very little ability to insulate you. What you can do is drill a hole between the noggins and the struts using a commercial company, and then they pipe in insulation into those cavities. I did this at my old house. The upstairs room where all the heat accumulates in summertime was just Oregon cladding on the outside and then gyprock with nothing in between. So we cut the holes between the noggins and the struts, filled it with this rock wool insulation, plastered it over again, and that transformed those walls from basically having no insulation to having an R, or a resistance rating, of 2.5. Now that's pretty good just by that retrofitting. And of course, in your roof, we all know about insulation in the roof. The thing to remember is your insulation in your roof, after about 10 years, it starts to degrade. It gets filled with dust and probably rat poo. It starts to shrink. And the thing I learned about insulation, the important thing is insulation is all about the gaps, the air gaps between whatever material. The more fluffy, the better it is at insulating. But as it starts to shrink and degrade, of course, it's losing those air cells and it starts to lose its value. A really important thing to remember about insulation: if you lose 5% of that insulation area, so it shrinks or there's gaps, it loses 50% of its effectiveness. That's pretty profound. So quite simple to do. Go up, have a look at your insulation. If it's more than 10 years old, I would passionately advocate you just put new insulation on top, covering it, making sure that you've got nice, fluffy material, and that's going to make a big difference as well. Okay. Moving on to air tightness, drafts. I passionately advocate, particularly in WA where we have some pretty badly designed houses. They leak, they've got gaps. And I think it was David Suzuki that said, if you add up all the little gaps between the poor fitting windows and doors and the little cracks everywhere, if you added them all up, they make a hole the size of a basketball. So if you came into a house in the middle of winter and there's this great big hole and everyone's rugged up or they've got the heaters going, you'd say, doesn't it make sense to plug that hole? But because there are little gaps everywhere, we kind of dismiss them. So making your house airtight is very important. Here's some of the things to do. So draft seals, getting all these different things that you can add, plugging up those gaps over the winter time, very important. And sealing any gaps in the floorboards. I know a lot of old homes in Bayswater on stumps. You can still go underneath and put insulation underneath there. Very, very important stuff. As a tip to find out where the drafts are going, walk around with a candle or lit incense, and whenever you see that smoke suddenly go that direction, you found your draft. Find those drafts, gap them, plug them. Very, very important stuff. And here it is, just to illustrate, your house is a glorified box. And as I've said before, most houses in WA have not been well designed and built. It's not like Europe and North America where they design for the cold and they built these houses to be well insulated. We got lazy with our housing in WA. We built them cheap and with lots of gaps. And you can see all the different ways that you can lose heat. So the more you can plug those gaps, the more that your house is going to be able to insulate you and protect you, and your power prices come down. All right. Let's have a look at the garden. To me, a house only becomes a home when it has a beautiful garden. I'm passionate about that. The house really is going to become a home when the garden becomes the biggest room of your house. And when I say that, I mean you have a space where kids want to go outside. They want to run around. There's a tree house. There's beautiful veggie gardens. There's paths meandering through where the dogs can run around. I just had my kids outdoors just this afternoon, and they were running around, chasing each other, riding on bikes in the garden that we designed and built with paths meandering through that landscape. So here's some of the tips to passively landscape. So in other words, using your garden as a natural air conditioner. Very, very important stuff. So I've got some of those points there. Again, orientation. Once you know where north is, you can follow the most important landscaping adage. You put the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. Very important. The right plants in the right place for the right reasons. So you think about where you put your plants and you think about them in relation to the climate and the weather and the neighbors and what you want those plants to do, what the soil type is like, and how much physical room that they have. And I've got some great species lists for you coming up soon. And if you're furiously trying to take notes, remember that, okay. So I've just had a question come in. What's a simple kind of insulation to put under the house, under the stumps? One thing you can do is get your air cell, or sorry, your bats, and you can cut those into pieces and just wedge them under the joists. Then you can get air cell and just staple that. So if that's your joists coming down and there's your floorboards, between that, you just would then push the insulation into there and then staple air cell underneath. So at the base of those joists, and that's a pretty simple way to insulate those areas. Okay, so orientation, very, very important, and making the garden the biggest room of your home. And I'm going to now show you some of those techniques. I'm very passionate about making sure people understand that your garden is what's going to make a big difference. Now, that garden in the top left-hand corner there of that last slide, that was artificial turf. I try in every lecture that I give to bag artificial turf. Artificial turf has no place in a garden in WA. It gets extraordinarily hot. It's plastic. It has huge amount of embodied carbon. It releases chemicals into the air as it gets hot because it's off-gassing. It's plastic. If you have pets, if they wee or poo on that, it's not going to break down. It's not a natural surface. When you have animal manure or urine on a natural surface like grass, in time it will break down because all the microbiota are going to attack it and break it down. It's not going to happen in artificial turf. Some people I've seen, they even weed it and hose it down in summer because it gets so hot and it's expensive. Never use artificial turf, please. Okay, but you're going to have hard surfaces, particularly if you're following the adage of a typical house in WA, which is big, and then there's a small garden, and people often just go, well, I'll pave it or I'll put the artificial turf. Okay, the important thing to remember that this is thermal mass for all the wrong reasons. So you imagine that paving on a nice, stinking hot day in Perth. It's nice and thick. It's absorbing that heat. And then when the sun goes down at the end of the day and you go, oh, thank God that horrible hot day's over, it ain't, because now that heat is just released from those hot pavers. And again, on those really hot days, remember when you've walked out onto your paving that's been bleaching in the sun all day and it's still warm at 2 a.m., it's still releasing that heat. And that's why the new suburbs of Perth use so much power, because there's no shading, just at the mercy of those hot days, and that hot air, that ambient air temperature around the houses stays high. So you just have that whirring air conditioner. Big power bills. Okay. So shading. Now that's a really expensive way, but effective way. That's called a solar pergola, and it's got it's remote control, so you can adjust it so those awnings can shut like that and keep the sun out. very expensive. You don't have to do that. You can use shade cloth. You can even put scatter rugs on the paving itself. That's enough to stop that insidious heating of those areas in the middle of summer. What I'm trying to say is minimize the amount of hard surfacing, because it's just going to make the temperature around your house in summer that much hotter, and therefore the house is hotter. And this is a garden that I can absolutely guarantee has never won any awards. And this is exactly the kind of thing that is going to be a massive impact for you and making your house and your power bills that much higher. I want you to really think that the garden is going to have either a negative impact on your power bills, or it's going to have a positive impact. And this is an example of a positive impact. So this is an outdoor area to the north. What family wouldn't want to gravitate out there in the middle of summer? Sit around, there's a nice bubbling fountain, they've got wine and cheese, and they're sitting with their mates and they're chatting. And that's how humans have lived for thousands of years. We have a semi-arid climate here in Perth. We should be enjoying living outside. And that is going to make our lives healthier. It's going to reduce our power bills. And very importantly, you start to own and appreciate and love the garden. It's not a tacked on afterthought anymore. It is an integral part of where you live. And that's when you get beautiful gardens that work for you. All right, so these are following that idea that I said, the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. These are some of the lists. So this presentation will be available on the City of Bayswater website very soon. So you'll be able to look at this at your leisure, pass it on, or take photos of this. So these are some of these evergreen plants. The evergreens are those that don't lose their leaves, and you can put them around your garden on that east and the west side. So there's some beautiful plants in that area there. These are some of the plants that we put on those narrow areas. So in Perth, houses have got bigger, lots have got smaller, which means we often have narrow strips. People think you can't grow plants there. You can, you just have a smaller list. And these are some of the plants that will do really well in that narrow area. We call these plants apical. In other words, they grow more like this rather than like that. Again, the right plant in the right place for the right reasons. Going to good nurseries, as I mentioned, like Ellenby or Dawson's, you're going to be able to ask them the questions and get the right species. And then that beautiful area to the north, the northeast, northwest, that's where you put in your beautiful deciduous trees. Again, go for those low chill varieties. My favorite up the top there, the Gleditsia, otherwise known as the honey locust. I've got 4 in my garden, and they are just beautiful plants, and they're fantastic for my beehive as well. All right, in terms of creating a beautiful environment and a place when you be outside, we need to remember that we live in one of the windiest parts of the world. We're the 3rd windiest city in the world. And unlike Chicago and Wellington that are windier, we have a hot, dry wind. And it is ceaselessly blowing off the deserts, sucking the moisture out of your plants, out of your soil, and unraveling the efficiency of your irrigation. So one of the most important things we need to do is understand that wind and control it. Okay, so that means that you get an aerial perspective. This is a really important part of really good design, is looking from an aerial perspective. You can mark where north is, east, west, south, and you can see for most of the time in Perth, we have these hot, dry winds coming from all of those directions. In the wintertime, that northwestern wind becomes a cold wind. When we have a cold front, it's usually a nor'wester that's blowing those in. And then for a lot of us, the sea breeze, the sou'wester, is a cooling breeze. But if you're close to the ocean, that becomes a salt-laden wind, and that can cause problems for plants as well. So the tip is, as much as possible, plant on your eastern boundary. So if you have those narrow plants on that eastern boundary, you're going to start to slow that wind down. And when you see plants doing this in the wind, they're not dancing. Well, they probably are, but what they're doing as well is they're dissipating the energy from that wind. And if it's a cold wind, they're slowing it down. They're reducing the wind chill factor. If it's a hot wind, they're slowing it and cooling it, because plants are the first evaporative air conditioners. They're giving off moisture through their evapotranspiration. So that wind is going to pick that up, slow down, and they can cool your environment. What does it do? It means that you moderate your environment, so it's nowhere near as hot in summer or cold in winter. And that is, of course, going to encourage you to go outside more often. And then this is one of the great secrets. Make sure you do a design. Get an aerial perspective, get a Google shot, get your own drone, whatever you need to do, and start to then design your garden based on those areas. So as a general rule, the north of your garden, that's where you put your deciduous plants. Think about that winter sun. On the east and the west, your evergreens. And the south, and the southeast in particular, that's where you put your wussy plants. Those plants you just can't live without from Asia or from Europe. They're beautiful plants. But if they could talk, they would say they hate living in Perth as well. So put them in the moderated, protected part of the garden so you can start to understand where the different climate zones, and therefore you can really effectively put the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. Very, very important stuff. And this is what you can start to create, a beautiful garden. This is the Shire of Mundaring offices, and that is a totally constructed garden. What I love about it is it's got diversity, which is great for wildlife. It's great for you, so you get all sorts of different wildlife documentaries literally live in front of you. You can see lizards and skinks and different birds, etc. But it's also going to need a fraction of the water and the nutrients that a typical European-style garden needs. Very importantly, if it's well designed, you design it so you have a range of flowering over the course of the 12 months. It's a little bit like a play. You have different people coming on at different times doing their bit. That's the same with a well-designed garden. So you design it so you have different things that are flowering at different times. So at any time of the year, there's something interesting to look at. And as humans, we gravitate towards that change, that diversity. It's absolutely critical for us to enjoy a landscape. Now, you can get wonderful information from the City of Bayswater. Your environmental officers have put together a beautiful little booklet which talks about the different species and how they grow in at the different times of the year. The Water Corporation has wonderful information on their website. As I mentioned before, Dawson's, Trillion Trees, and of course, L&B Tree Farm all have great information to help you. All right, food gardens. I'm so excited that people want to grow food. It's wonderful. I heard a great story. Well, it's quite a sad story. We all know about the toilet paper COVID crisis, people wrestling over toilet paper and how ugly that was. It was almost as bad, people at Bunnings trying to buy punnets of veggie seedlings. So it's great people want to grow their own food, but there's a massive gap between a punnet of promise and actually plucking beautiful, nutritious, healthy food from the plants you've stuck in the ground. So let's talk about that in a little bit of detail. The most important thing we need to remember living in Perth, we are the fastest drying part of the world's driest continent. Our rainfall is going south. If we didn't have desalination and massive amounts of underground aquifers to plunder, we would be in massive amounts of crisis in terms of how much water we had. So never lose sight of the fact we need to get more crop from every drop. We need to become the most water efficient society on the planet. Okay, and then, as you know, in Bayswater, we have the worst soils in the world. So if you're trying to get things to grow and you don't improve those soils, you really are going to struggle. And this is the adage. This is the most important thing to remember. Your grandparents knew it. Through human history, we have understood this intuitively. Healthy soil gives you healthy plants, and healthy plants then deliver healthy, nutritious food. It's that simple. So you need to build your soil up. Feed the soil. And I've just listed some of the important things that you can do to feed that soil. If I can get my machine to move. Why have you frozen on me? Okay, I'm going to keep trying to press this button to make it work, but these are some of the things that you can add to your soil to make it work. I might just... Okay, so you can add compost, you can add soil improvers, you can buy commercial mixes. I get a lot of my soil improvers, etc., from places like Bailey's, from Green Life Soil Company, Eureka Composts, Seawise. They all produce beautiful products. Thanks, mate. Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. Yep. So that's absolutely critical. The other thing to remember, when you're growing a veggie plant, it needs at least 14 different minerals to be able to survive and thrive. 14. So if you're just putting in super, as in superphosphate, or you're putting in urea, urea is just nitrogen. Superphosphate is just phosphorus with a bit of sulfur. Potash is just potassium. We do need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, otherwise known as NPK, but we need trace elements or micronutrients of zinc, boron, molybdenum, calcium, magnesium, manganese. These are all absolutely critical for the plants and for you. So The more that you put these micronutrients into your soil, the more the plants can take them up and the more they're going to be reflected in the food that you consume. So I passionately advocate that you spend the time building that soil up. That's why I mentioned putting in the composts, and as well, fish and seaweed solutions. Rock dust is suddenly, thank you, mate. Yeah, go back a little bit. My apologies for this. Keep going a little bit more. Okay, keep going a bit more. Why is it? Okay. Okay, we can leave it there. That's great. Yep. So I'll put it. Are we on? Yeah, we are. Okay. My apologies for that. The very important thing is to put in the fish and the seaweed. Rock dust has become really, really popular, and I love adding rock dust. So good companies now, those soil providers that I talked about, can make blends, and they're all about making sure you get that broad suite of those trace elements. It's absolutely critical. Give your plants regular fish and seaweed solutions or compost tea. And I'm not for a moment saying that a purchased product is better than what you produce at home. I'm not saying that. But knock your socks off, make your own materials, absolutely. Turn that green waste into green gold, feed it onto your soil. But the key is organic matter. Feeding your soil on an ongoing basis is absolutely critical. And remember, food growing parts of your garden are like a high performance engine. They're going to use large amounts of fuel, and the fuel is all of that organic matter. When you pluck a ripe strawberry or a tomato, when you slice off a big silver beet leaf, you're exporting nutrients from that garden and you're consuming it. So you need to keep putting those nutrients back into that system. That's why food growing areas, you must feed them. Now, here's some of the issues we need to remember. Add clay, compost, and ideally some zeolite or spongolite. These are very important additives to make sure you can hold those nutrients on site. And so people are seeing the wetting agent image there now, my wonderful producer. Yep. Okay, so this is another sad byproduct of growing food, and any gardens in WA, particularly the sands, is that dreaded water repellency. And if you live in Bayswater, etc., you know all about this. You must use a good wetting agent in all parts of your garden. And in your food growing areas, it's still absolutely critical, because that water repellency is a byproduct of huge amounts of organic matter being added. It's a byproduct of the breakdown of that organic material. So use a good organic wetting agent to make sure you keep getting the water going into the soil. Remember, if the water isn't going into the soil, it's not giving your plants a drink. It's totally wasted. And this is a really important thing to remember. Plants have an amazing ability to look after themselves. So when I give my talks, I spend most of my time saying how to make the plants healthy. Then they largely look after themselves. Remember, long before Bayer, Monsanto, ICI, Syngenta, all these companies that produce chemicals for us, plants were surviving and thriving long before then. Your grandparents and their food allotments did not have an armory of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So these are some of the techniques to help you minimize the need for chemical intervention. So get your plants as healthy as possible is number one. So let's deal with those pests. Number one thing to do is to go for that diversity. Absolutely critical. Don't go for monocultures. Make sure you have a diversity of your food growing plants, integrate in a range of different colorful plants as well. And remember, anything in the yellow, orange, violet, indigo end of the light spectrum, that's what your insects can see. So you want your ladybirds, your hoverflies, your lacewings to see your plants, and they get attracted and will start to eat a lot of your pests. So get nature working for you. Very, very important. And on that score, make sure you let some of your plants go to seed. You want those beautiful beneficial insects and other animals to take up permanent residency in your garden. You want them to think it's a permanent Kentucky tour in your garden. So that means that you have a suite of colorful plants, you have water, you create habitat. Very, very important. Beautiful. Okay, now if you do need to attack a particular pest and disease, number one thing to keep in mind, very important this. Find out what the hell the problem is in the first place. Don't do what our warring generals do, which is they think there's a terrorist over there, so they just bomb the place. That didn't work, so they use a bigger bomb. And that's how we as humans have tried to deal with problems, is we just put force and violence to try and destroy and obliterate a problem. It just doesn't work. What you need to do is get a little bit of science behind it. Go out at night with your torch, and that's when most damage is done on your plants. So find out who the culprit is. There's lots of massive, fantastic information to help you now. There are weed and pest apps that you can put onto your phone. And the Ag Department of WA has the free Pest and Disease Information Service. It's an awesome service. So you can send in a sample or a photo of a pest or a disease, and they will tell you what it is, and then the best way to control it without massive damage to the rest of your garden. You want to do a clinical strike if you are doing a strike at all, so you're minimizing off-target impacts. Very, very important stuff. Then if you do need to do an attack, you know what it is, and then you can start to use really good quality products. So there are some fantastic ones out there. These are some of the products that are out there now that are organic. Gone are the days where you need to use things like heptachlor and dieldrin and DDT. We're now using much gentler products. Okay, my apologies. My presentation is getting a few wobbly bits, but even for things like snails, you can now get iron chelate. So rather than the blue colored snail pellets, you can get the rust colored ones as well. So they're commercially available. You can go to Bunnings, Mitre 10, Dawson's, Waldex, and they all now sell really good organic alternatives. And generally, the horticulturalist there is probably going to want to steer you in that direction as well. And that's going to make a big difference for you. And I think we've lost our PowerPoint. Okay, we're getting towards the end of it now anyway, which is pretty good, but very, very important. At this time of the year, the other really important thing I really want to urge you to do is to grow seasonal. Very, very important. And this is my favorite time of the year for growing veggies because the climate is on your side. This is the cool, temperate time of the year. It's not the semi-arid in summer, but at this time of the year, this is the time of the year to be growing your brassicas, which of course is your cauliflower, your Brussels sprouts and your cabbages. But it's also the time to be growing things like potatoes and onions. And I love potatoes and onions as a food growing opportunity because unlike a little tiny seed or a little seedling, a potato or an onion is a massive big store of energy and forgiveness. So it gives you a lot of latitude and a lot of buffering so you can put them in and not do so good a job and you still get a crop. And this is a great time to get the kids involved. Okay, thank you, mate. This is a great time to get and you can see here one of the important things and why I spent so much time talking about diversity in your garden is that when you have an ecosystem in your garden, when you have a range of plants and you have bird baths and you have logs and rocks, you are going to create the situation and conditions where you're going to have wildlife there. Firstly, there's not a human on the planet that doesn't enjoy some interaction with wildlife. But secondly, they are going to do large amounts of work to help you in the garden. And remember, even things like honey eaters, willy wagtails, frogs, they're all eating pests in your garden. So when you see them there, you know that they're working on your behalf. Very, very important from that point. Okay, so getting back to growing the potatoes, get some seed potatoes or normal potatoes and you cut where you see the potato and where the little eyes are, that's the bit that's going to grow. So you can cut your potato into chunks, put an eye in the ground into your prepared soil with it poking upward and get the kids involved. That's what I love. They can put them in the ground, put the soil on top, come back in 16 to 20 weeks, and the kids then can lift out the beautiful potatoes. Of course, you've been doing work in between, feeding them every couple of weeks with the fish and the seaweed solution, more slow release organic fertilizer. But the kids can then lift and harvest those potatoes, take them indoors, wash them, and they can turn them into chips or wedges. How cool is that? And that, I guarantee, is going to make kids so much more connected to nature and so much more willing to take up gardening as one of their habits. And I can absolutely guarantee one of the greatest habits your kids can ever indulge in is gardening and spending time in nature. It is the most important gift you can give them is a love of nature and gardening. Okay. Interestingly, we now know that when you turn the soil and you have good healthy soil, it releases certain bacteria, mycobacteria, and they can trigger serotonin release in your brain, which is the feel-good chemical hormone that's going to reduce anxiety and make you more calm. So it's a really powerful way to help our kids. Okay, there are lots of different ways that you can grow veggies. Bayswater, as a council, is one of the most progressive councils. They're passionately urging people to grow food even on the verges. And these are just some of the fantastic organizations that are out there that can help you in whatever it is you're trying to do on your sustainability journey. So many different enterprises, so many different initiatives that are about reducing waste, about living more sustainably, about connecting within our communities. And I would passionately advocate that you do that. If you haven't been to City Farm, for instance, go there and check out the beautiful gardens that they have. That's the pinnacle of organic community food growing areas in WA, and you'll learn so much. And remember, that was once one of the most toxic, degraded sites in WA. So when you go there now and see this miracle of food production, that's all because their mantra was feed the soil. Feed the soil. And that's what you can do when you repetitively keep looking at building up your soil. Okay, we're ready for questions now. This is the exciting part. I love this part of the night where we start to be able to get some questions and help you out. Okay, are double glazed windows worth the extra cost is question number one. Okay, I'm a big fan of double glazed windows. I've put them in my house on all the windows and all the doors. They are more expensive. The price is coming down. That's the good news. Bunnings now sell a much cheaper double glaze, which is pretty good, and it's called Polar. I'm not pushing a particular product, but I have a good friend who's a very good builder who says they're pretty good, and they're probably half the price of conventional double glazing. So it's called Polar, and it's sold at Bunnings. The other good thing about double glazing is that it's magnificent, if it's good quality, at shutting out external noise. Can't put a price on that. If it's really noisy outside, you're near a busy road, double glazing can make such a difference. And of course, it's noise attenuation because it's actually sealing really well, and it's the gaps that allow the noise in apart from just the single pane. So short answer is, I think double glazing is worth it. Just be careful though, if you have big areas of double glazing and it's still getting that summer sun hitting it, it's still going to be letting that heat in, but it's not going to let it out again. So if you're not careful, double glazing can make your house hotter in summer. Again, external shading, making sure you protect it. How important is it to use local species? A great question in relation to the garden. I think it's essential to use local plants. That's not to say that's the only plants you use. I use the analogy that the framework of your garden should be your local endemic plants. Local endemic means these are the plants that would have grown here naturally originally. So they have a much greater value for encouraging and keeping wildlife in your landscape. You will start to see the most incredible organisms coming back. We now know there's over 200 species of native bees, and some of these native bees will blow your mind. They are so beautiful, and you'll start to get them back in your garden simply because you get those local endemic plants. Lots more information about local endemic plants from the City of Bayswater. Again, they put out some really good information to help you get those local endemic plants into your garden. So that's a great question there. Okay, another question we have here. If I run the air conditioner at 26 rather than 24, am I using more energy? Yes, you are. So remember, so 22 to 24 degrees is the sweet spot for the air conditioner. Above that, you're using more power. So it's really, so if you had it at 26 degrees in the summertime, sorry, I think that's your question there, you're going to be using less power. So the more that you ramp it up towards the hotter side in summer, you're going to use less power. So if you have it at 26, my apologies, I read your question wrong there. So yeah, if you use it at 26 in summer, you are going to use probably 20% less power. So that's a good thing to do if your family's happy with that one. I'm interested in installing a grey water system is this question. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations? Great question. I love grey water. I have a big rambling, rambunctious family, and we were producing about 100,000 litres of grey water per year that went straight out onto the garden. Just to clarify, grey water is water from the shower and the laundry. It's not from the toilet or the sink. That's called black water. Grey water It's totally legal. You have to use a health department approved system, and it has to be installed by a plumber. But Greywater is a magnificent system for WA. Okay, I am very comfortable in recommending advanced wastewater systems, and they produce the Greywater system I have at my place. I've had it for 10 years. It's about the size of a big esky. So it's that big. It doesn't have it doesn't have settling tanks. So it's what's called a self-cleaning instantaneous Greywater system. So as soon as the Greywater goes in, it goes with a very crude filter to get rid of hair and lint. It gets pushed straight out through the purple pipe. The purple pipe is the type of drip irrigation you need to use for Greywater, and it goes straight out into the garden. So advanced wastewater systems, you can find them online, and they are a wonderful company that produce really, really good Greywater systems. The other one is Water Installations, Dr. Ross Mars. He does fantastic Greywater systems as well. Okay, where was the place you can send photos of pests to find out what they do, etc.? Okay, so that's the Ag Department, and it's the free Pest and Disease Information Service. So Pest and Disease Information Service. And if you Google that on the WA Department of Agriculture, or just ring them up, and that's a free service. It's a wonderful service. As I said, they'll be able to send you images. Plus, they have wonderful garden notes. They're all free. You've paid for them through your taxes. And those garden notes are a wealth of information on everything from growing food in WA to pest control, organic pest control. And the Ag Department, like pretty much every other institution, has moved a lot more towards gentler, more environmentally friendly practices. So you're going to find some really good information. So they have those garden notes, and you know, it's over 100 years worth of accumulated knowledge. You're going to find that on the Ag Department website. Very cool. Okay, is growing lawn worth it? Or are you better growing trees and shrubs and bushes? Okay, lawn's a miracle plant. When you think about what lawn does, when you think of what we do to it on a football field and a cricket field, it gets torn and ripped to shreds, and yet within a week it's healed itself. It's an amazing surface. Okay, but I only recommend putting in lawn if you want it. Right plant in the right place for the right reason. So if you've got a dog, you've got kids, you want to kick the football, run around, lawn is without a doubt the greatest plant surface that we can have on our landscape. And again, it's not artificial turf, it's the real deal. But personally, I don't recommend verge on the lawn because you don't kick the football and roll around on the ground there with kids. So put it in an area where you need it, if you need it. And the thing to remember about lawn is, particularly cooch and kikuyu, which are the two most popular lawns, they are also the worst weeds in the world. Anyone who's put cooch and kikuyu in knows it goes into those garden beds adjacent to where it's been laid. So make sure you have good protection between your garden beds and your veggie gardens, and if you're going to be putting lawn in. So I would say small area of lawn, maybe 20 or 30% of the garden, and then lots of trees and shrubs to give the dappled shade and the protection. Apart from solar, are there any other renewable systems, and for example, wind? Okay, small scale wind has really struggled to take off in WA. I think quite simply in WA, by far and away, the best renewable energy system is solar, and have a look at the batteries. The battery technology is good. There's lots of different types. It's still quite expensive, but it's definitely worth looking at that. But wind, we've really struggled to get good commercial wind systems. Plus, you need to have a separate, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. You have to have your own, they have their, I can't even remember the word now. So yeah, at this stage, solar is definitely the way to go. Any thoughts on Tesla power batteries for homes for saving power? Look, there's no doubt that Tesla, and there's a whole range of companies that are now producing batteries. It is definitely worth doing your homework, and I think in time those are going to become very cost effective. But at the moment, it is still quite expensive, and you've got the grid that you're paying for at the moment. So most people are still using the grid to store their energy during the day when they're at work, and then they buy it back at the end of the day. But that said, batteries are going to be in that space more and more into the future. Best direction to put your veggie gardens. Okay. I didn't talk about this, but in the summer, it's still good to have your veggie gardens facing north. In the wintertime, that's absolutely critical because they're not going to get enough sun otherwise. But in the summer, you want to make sure that you put at least a 20 to 30% shade cloth over the top of your veggies in the summer, because your veggies need about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. And in the summertime, they're going to get up to 16 hours. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So they need to get that at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So if you don't have a bed that meets those needs all the time, grow your veggies in bags. That's what I do. And I migrate my bags to my food growing areas to the north in the winter. Okay, last question. Where can you get help to design a garden? Okay, there's some amazing garden designers that are out there. There's a few that I can recommend. Sustainable Outdoors is a very good designer. Wild About Gardens is another fantastic garden designer that I know of. Inspired by Nature, Lisa Passmore is another very good garden designer. And the Forever Project, our own company, we can put you in touch with garden designers as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that was our last question. I'd just like to leave you with the most important part of all of this, which is sustainability is really a journey. And I hope that you continue this process of learning and growing and evolving. I tried to show you just some of the amazing organizations that are out there, because you can get so much ongoing information. We will be doing more workshops through the Forever Project into the future, and hopefully with the support of the City of Bayswater. Good night, and thank you and good luck.